This week on Gravel, Andrew tells us about his trip down to Louisiana where he was supposed to look at erosion, but all he did is catch fish and shoot ducks. Then we talk a little bit about optics and some of the cool things that are coming out, but that completely devolves into a whole argument over fair chase and the use of technology in hunting. We sometimes have technology problems, that's why it doesn't sound so great today, but we're always on Gravel.
Welcome, America, to another episode of On Gravel. This is your somewhat regular conversation with three of your favorite people. I'm Andrew McKean, calling you from Glasgow, Montana.
What do you mean
That's the cue
semi-regular?
for one of you
we
guys
do this every week.
It feels more regular than that, also.
Well, that's what my wife says, too, that, you know, she says every free minute is going into the podcast, and I think as the listener can attest, clearly we're not putting that much time into it.
That would be Ryan Bronson. He is talking to you from
Studio 1A in Eagan, Minnesota, on the shores of Black Hawk Lake.
And this
Dinger?
is Eric Dinger coming to you from next to a puddle in an alley in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Well, we're going to talk today about a couple of destinations. I just came back from not so balmy Louisiana. In fact, when I decided to go there, it was months ago, and I thought, well, geez, the best destination in mid-January is anywhere except my homeland of northeastern Montana. But I think on one day, the high temperature was the same in both places. Those Coonasses were shivering, and up here on the Great Plains, people were suntanning. We're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming SHOT Show. We've got some pretty interesting technology, I think, that's going to drop there, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Dinger promises us a gripping Goose Story. And we're going to return to our dichotomous question. This was a franchise that we had early on in our podcasting career, and we've kind of dropped it. So we'll save the details for later. But yeah, Louisiana. I actually went down there on a duck hunt. It was a Ducks Unlimited sponsored hunt. Browning also helped out, so we were shooting the new version of the old Humpback, the 8.5s. And I was actually hoping that we were going to shoot 16 gauges, the latest incarnation of the Sweet 16. But I think there's going to be a waterfowl load in 16 gauge that's going to be announced at SHOT Show, but they didn't have it in time, so we shot 12 gauges. But it was cool for me leaving what has been a kind of weird waterfowl season up here in the Northern Plains. We've been doing really well on field geese, but not so great on ducks. Nobody really knows where they're going, but every night they're flying back to the roost on the river, and there's tens of thousands of greenheads. And I don't mean just mallards. I mean 90% of the birds in the flock appear to be male, big mature male greenheads. Anyway, it was interesting to leave here and go to Louisiana where I never saw a mallard. But I seem to have seen every other kind of duck. I had my great bucket list species down there was a mottled duck, which the Coonasses in Cajunville call summer mallards, which I think is kind of funny. We saw one, but we never got a shot at it.
Andrew, we can't. You've used Coonass twice. I think you need to define that for our listeners.
So a Coonass is a regional term of endearment for a rural Louisiana Cajun. But what I noticed when I was there is I think you could be a Coonass in Nebraska, you could be a Coonass in Ontario, you could damn well be a Coonass in eastern Montana. So I think it's more a lifestyle than anything, but the original Coonasses are kind of backwoods Acadians of rural, marshy Louisiana.
So would this be the equivalent of a Jackpine Savage?
It would. Could you be a Jackpine Savage in Arizona though? Or New Jersey?
I don't know. I realize I'm derailing the topics that we wanted to hit, but Coonass just intrigued me.
But that's a question for the agents. It deserves consideration from our listener. Can you be a Coonass in Nebraska and a Jackpine Savage in Arizona.
We'll stand by the switches and hear the responses. As a further aside, last night we had black and redfish. I brought back a bag or two of redfish from Louisiana, and I was trying to tell my kids about the culture down there. And as I described it to one of my boys, I said, one of the things that frets me in my quiet moments is the homogenization of America. So we've got the same franchises across the country. We've got a lot of the strips and certainly suburban areas look a lot like their neighbors in a whole other state or region. So I really love intact regions that have, are still authentically culturally separate. Now I'm talking too much, but coastal Louisiana is its own country. I mean, it's got a lot of cultural integrity that remains, and part of it is the accent. I was trying to tell my kid I'm horrible at accents. Every one of my accents sounds vaguely Irish. Even my Rastafarian is like a kind of weird rural Irishman. But down there, so as I was cooking redfish last night, I was trying to talk like all of the fishing and duck guides I was around all the time. They kind of talk like this. It's kind of a sing-song thing, and they'd say this dat. They'd never say that. It was just dat. We're going to go after that duck over there, and then after we get that duck, we're going to go back over here. We're going to get the duck, and then we're going to do a little fishing and kind of slur around it. It's like, so that might be Rastafarian, but that was what everybody sounded like, and apparently I'm enough of a chameleon that I was talking like that last night. But I did ask one of the fishing guides who was...
I would call your accent slightly Elmer Fuddyian.
I was going to say a hair-lipped leprechaun.
Anyway, I asked one of the guys down there, I'm like, it's vaguely French. It has kind of a little bit of that sing-song kind of French brogue. And I said, do you speak French? He's like, oh, hell no. I couldn't understand no French. I'm like, so is this Cajun? It's like, I don't even know what Cajun is. Like, that's a real evidence of an intact culture when they have no idea what the culture actually is because they're immersed in it so completely. Anyway, as an aside, yeah, so a lot of redheads, a lot of widgeons, some pintails. I saw a canvasback but never got a shot at it. Both blue and green-winged teal. Shovelers. Golly, what else? Anyway, it's just a great mixed bag hunt. And now I'm back.
That sounds like a pretty cool experience. I've never had that opportunity yet. Are you able to fish redfish and hunt in the exact same spot?
I would say adjacent spots. So the redfish, at least at this time of the year, are in bigger bodies of water. So the duck hunting is in. So let me just set the table a little bit. We're just off the lower Mississippi, and the lower Mississippi down there is really leveed and channelized. They said the river is about 90 to 120 feet deep there, and every day dozens of ocean-going ships are moving up and down the Mississippi, going to New Orleans and then points north. So lots of oil tankers and a lot of big ships with cranes on them that go out and service all of the offshore oil rigs. And I mean, there was a lot of traffic there. So the actual Mississippi is about a half a mile wide there. Then there's all these channels off of it. There's so much water coming down the Mississippi right now. It's pushing a lot of that river water into these estuaries off to the side. So what we would do every morning is we'd cross the Mississippi, actually in a biggest John boat I've ever seen, big flat bottom boat about 36 feet long, just full of duck hunters. We would cross the Mississippi in front of and behind these gigantic ocean-going ships, which when you're doing that in the dark is a pucker factor. And then we would go into these side channels and little estuaries where they had parked the duck boat. So we would unload from the big pond, the big platoon boat, the big 36-footer, into smaller boats, and then we would go out into the blinds from there. So we hunted kind of smaller waters and a lot of little reed patches. The fishing was best in the bigger sort of basins that are just off the Mississippi. But we could definitely do this fishing and hunting in the same day. We'd hunt ducks in the morning and then go back, throw down some food, and go out and spend the rest of the afternoon red fishing. Pretty fun.
So is the water salty where you're hunting ducks?
Not really. I was asking that question. Is that even brackish? They said it's probably like 95% fresh and a little bit of saltwater intrusion, but not as much as I would have thought. And part of the reason is the Mississippi is running so high right now. It's about 15-foot river is what they said. They said it's normally about 12 or 13 feet this time of year. So you've got basically 2 feet of freeboard. All that river water, that fresh river water, is pushing into the marshes where we were duck hunting and pushing out a lot of that salt water. And the other thing is, the redfish are, they like a little brackish water. In fact, they spend a lot of their time out in the salt water, and they just come in the wintertime into these freshwater estuaries where they're grubbing around on the shoreline. That was one of the interesting things about fishing is we cast either plastics or dead shrimp under a bobber right against the grass. I mean, it was a perfect cast if you actually hit the grass and then sort of brought your bait right into the water adjacent to it. These redfish are only in 18 or 36 inches of water, not very deep, and they're just sort of, they're a drum. It's a black drum. So they're doing a lot of grubbing on the mucky bottom, pushing up worms and shrimp and whatever else they can eat.
Are their tails sticking out? Are you sight fishing them, or?
No, I was sort of hoping that might be the case. We never did. I think we were in just slightly deeper water than that, and the water was super turbid. I mean, the visibility was less than a foot. So it's just basically casting to good-looking spots and popping your popper that, these are drums, so they make a sound when they feed that sounds like a popper. And so the popper gets their attention, and they go to the sound of the area where they heard the pop, and there's a shrimp. They bite it, you pull it in, and that's what we ate last night.
What did the family think?
Oh, they loved it. Iris she's kind of anti-fish, but she choked some down. She said it was probably pretty good, which for her is high. For a 14-year-old girl is high compliment.
I've had one of those.
So you promised us a good goose story, Dinger. Let's hear it.
Well, I don't know how good it is, but it's my goose story. I love to waterfowl hunt, but over the last few years, it seems like waterfowl hunting has taken a back seat to teaching my wife to deer hunt, taking my kids deer hunting, and then I've gotten into traveling to upland hunt a bunch. Now with a red dog in my life, it's time to think about waterfowling. So I went to the one place around Lincoln I know always holds geese because I had in mind a recipe. I wanted to make goose prosciutto. You guys ever made goose prosciutto?
Nope.
I've eaten it, never made it.
So I found this recipe on Cabela's website, and I love prosciutto. And in general, I really enjoy goose. Goose is in my childhood, probably not unlike yours. When we had goose growing up, my parents cooked the crap out of it, and it was always so tough and just not very flavorful. But I've come to know that if you know how to treat a goose and you don't overcook it, it can be really delicious. In fact, I love to just slice the breast and eat it like steak. Fantastic if you do it right. And of course, if you get the right goose, the migrating geese sometimes get a little tougher and stuff. But a good corn-fed local goose can be a great thing. And so I went out in search of a single goose because I had goose prosciutto in mind, and found myself this goose, shot said goose. My red dog was deathly afraid of it, would run up to it, it would flop or move around on her, and she'd run back to me like she'd just seen the boogeyman or something. Pretty adorable and also highly useless. You have a retrieving dog, you hope they'll retrieve a bird. But she's a 35-pound dog, and that was probably a 14-pound goose. It was a pretty good goose. So get the goose home. I hung it in the garage for 7 days. Aged the bird. I haven't done that a lot. Do you guys age your game birds?
No.
I have not, but I talked to a chef this year that said that, if you hang a pheasant for a couple of days before you even pluck it, first of all, they pluck easy, which I've never plucked a pheasant because the skin always drips, and then you can roast them with the skin on and everything, and he swears by it. I don't know that I could convince my wife to let me hang birds in my garage for a couple of days before I eat them, but I'm willing to give it a try.
Well, I hid mine. I hung it inside a trash can, an empty trash can, so my wife didn't have to pay attention to it. So hung this goose, ended up plucking it, which your chef friend was right that I've plucked a lot of geese before, and this plucked easier than any goose I've seen or plucked before. My sister and I had a little bird cleaning business when we lived in South Dakota, and people would drop off 50 snow geese, and that was just an awful fresh snow goose plucking for the birds. Ugh. So anyway, hung the bird, plucked it, cut the breast out, marinated it or I brined it for 2 days, and then dry rubbed it for a night. And the next night I came home to cook the goose, or to smoke the goose, turn it into prosciutto. Super excited about it. That it cuts beautifully. It's just a really, really pretty dish when you do it right. And the house smelled great. I knew I had made dinner for our family that evening and left instructions for the gal that picks our kids up from school to cook this dish at 425 for an hour and a half, because it was a potato and bacon dish. And I came in, it didn't smell like I thought it was going to smell, but it definitely smelled like something had been cooking. It smelled great. And so I'm looking for this goose because I'm going to go throw it on the smoker, and the damn thing's in the oven, and it's like goose brick. She had accidentally put the wrong dish in the oven, and my goose prosciutto had become really, really thick goose jerky. It was not only devastating because I'd made a special trip for a special goose, but we were going to serve it with some friends and have a nice bottle of wine, and it was going to be kind of a little goose manifesto. Not a lot of people think that goose is good to eat, and I really like it. And if you treat it right, it can be delicious. And so here I spend, I'm probably 4 or 5 hours into this goose by the time you go find the damn thing and bring it home and pluck it and prep it. I'm ready to smoke this thing and make my point to the world, and I ended up slicing it into what could best be described as really bland goose jerky. So the old goose prosciutto turned into a mighty flop. The jerky is not bad. The flavor of the meat is really good, but it's got that overcooked, really dry texture to it, so it may become dog incentive. So no goose prosciutto at the Dinger household so far.
So I want to say that I'm immensely disappointed, because here I thought that the payoff for this story was going to be this wonderful goose prosciutto recipe that and I was going to tell you, save some, bring it with you up to the Twin Cities here next month when you're coming up to visit, because I've got a package of dove breasts, and I wanted to wrap the dove breasts in goose prosciutto and grill them, because I think that could blow people's minds. But now that's not going to happen.
It's still goose season, so not all is lost. I could probably go find another one.
Or maybe you can take that potato bacon casserole and wrap your dove in that.
What's a potato bacon casserole? I'm not familiar. Do you mean a hot dish?
A hot
whatever
dish, yep.
Whatever Dinger did not feed his family.
No, the hot dish was raw in the fridge. And you could put any meat in that dish, and it would have been fantastic. Even if she had put the goose in the hot dish, the goose would have been better. But alas, we had the hot dish the next night. And by the way, what more upper Midwestern thing can you say than to call a casserole a hot dish?
And by the way, did you just call her a lass?
What?
Did you just call her a lass?
Well, he's doing everything he can to not call her his nanny, because he thinks that's pretentious.
Alas, touche.
Alas.
Touche, sir. So we have a nanny. She picks our kids up from school. She is willing to put things in the oven and cook them so that we have meals ready, so that my working wife doesn't have to get home and cook, which she does a lot, but it adds stress. And so you're right. I was trying not to say we had a nanny, but our nanny cooked my goose.
So I've got a bonus dichotomous question following the cooked goose thing, and it's Midwestern related. But you know that game you played when you were a kid where everyone sat in a circle and you went around and tapped people on the head and said, duck, duck, When the person was it, what did you say? Andrew.
Goose.
Dinger.
Goose. Duck, duck, goose.
So both of you are wrong because the game is Duck, Duck, Grey Duck.
Oh,
And
Jesus.
the fact... So early last season when the Vikings were pretty good, they after they scored a touchdown, one of the dances they did is celebrations in the end zone as they did that. They played the game Duck, Duck, Grey Duck. And the guy that scored the touchdown, Adam Thielen, is a Minnesotan, so he called it Duck, Duck, Grey Duck when he was talking in the post-game interview. And apparently the whole country just went berserk because no one had ever heard of that outside of Minnesota. So I was hoping, beyond hope, that one of you would have played the proper iteration of the game, Duck, Duck, Grey Duck. But, all right.
Actually, to bring that full circle, so some of the, in fact, every one of the Cajuns, they had a little bit of trouble with duck identification, and anything that was not a pintail or a teal was a gray duck. So maybe the voyageurs, of the upper Great Lakes and the Arcadians of southern Louisiana have this in common.
Maybe that's it. But it died out somewhere along the line, going down the Mississippi when they play the game. I think gray duck is a common name that a lot of people use for a gadwall.
So basically, you play pintail, gray duck.
Well, no, we used to. You'd name colors. You'd say blue duck and yellow duck and red duck because you had to dumb it down. Because I'd have been out there saying merganser, that would have been what would have been the garbage bird that made you it. But no, the culture was Duck, Duck, Grey Duck, and it just shocks and appalls me when I hear Duck, Duck, Goose as a game. I feel sorry for America's children.
I'm a little surprised it wasn't loon. Duck, duck, loon.
Maybe, but have you ever seen a loon try to get up and move? I mean, it takes them 200 yards before they can get off the water, so...
Cormorant, loon.
Oh.
So we have, we're all going to be in Las Vegas next week at the SHOT Show. This is the annual great gathering of the shooting and hunting industry. And it's going to be fun to we're going to try to pull off an on-gravel episode when we actually get to see each other, wink and nudge each other. I don't know how you wink somebody, but we're going to try it. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting week. It's I think probably I speak for the rest of you when I say it's anticipated but also dreaded. You get to spend a whole week in Vegas after about 2 days. It's not it's have to. I feel like a little bit like a hostage. But anyway, I'm excited for a couple reasons. One, it is the annual sort of coming out party for an awful lot of pretty interesting gear. I know Federal in the past has unveiled some new calibers and new bullets and ammunition offerings there. A lot of industries do that, or companies within the industry do it. As I think I mentioned on the show in the past, I cover optics for Outdoor Life, among other outlets, and I'm psyched about seeing some new technology within the optics world. What I've seen in the past couple of years is optics are a little like a bicycle. If it got two wheels that turn, that's sort of the foundation for it. Now everybody's trying to build more and more and more things on top of that platform. So anyway, that's what my eyes are going to be tuned to.
Got anything in particular you're excited to see?
Looking ahead, we've had range-finding binoculars out for a long time. Zeiss had one of the first ones. Then Leica jumped into it. Swarovski's got one. Everybody's kind of dabbled in it, but it's not really taken off. This year, Vortex has a new one. Loophole has a new one. There's another one I'm forgetting about. So that's kind of interesting to see if they can incorporate laser rangefinding in with binoculars and really make it at an accessible price point. That's been the tough thing right now is they're well over $1,000 on average. I think the Bushnell 1600 was right at $1,000, and that's to me about the baseline for that. So I'm eager to see if we've got if we've got some lower than that price point.
Well, the thing that I'm interested in seeing is size, because that was always one of the dings on the range finding binoculars is once you put the range finding dope inside there, they started to get big and bulky and heavy.
Yeah. I still think what I've seen so far, and they've been mostly prototypes and just imagery, is they still look pretty bricky.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm eager to see that too. One of the interesting things, as we saw with SIG last year with their BDX system of range-finding rifle scope, or rather, it's not a range-finding rifle scope, but it's got basically a holdover that communicates with a rangefinder, is all that circuitry and the electronics really was sized down and made pretty compact. So I'm eager to see if that is translated into binoculars.
Was that the scope that actually moved the reticle for the adjustment?
Yeah.
Or did it just communicate it?
It doesn't move the actual crosshairs, but there's an illuminated holdover point on the vertical stadia of the crosshair or the reticle. So the way it works is you've got, one of the dings on it is you've got three electronics. You've got your phone with a app that kind of is the brains behind everything. You've got a battery-operated laser rangefinder defining the range, and then you've got a battery-operated rifle scope. Batteries being what they are, I think there's a lot of people who were concerned about what happens when the lights go out. But when everything works with that SIG system, you get the range with your rangefinder, and it immediately shows you the proper holdover point and hold off point with the windage inside your rifle scope. It does it through a series of lights. It's actually it's a pretty cool deal.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. It's cool technology, but I believe that if you use that rifle scope, you're not allowed to put your animal in the Boone and Crockett record book. I think they've determined that that's a violation of their fair chase policy.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about that, Andrew.
Well, let me talk a little. Well, we can go into it right now if you'd like to. You're talking about technology assisting hunters.
Well, I think
in general.
Yeah, I think there's debates going on right now in the state of Wyoming. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department is asking the legislature to give their commission authority to make regulations that restrict technology. Apparently, right now they don't feel like they have that authority, and so they're asking the Wyoming legislature to give them that authority. And so they're talking about smart rifles, which that technology is on the it's on the continuum towards the smart rifle technology. Drones, night vision, infrared, and cellular trail cameras. Those are all things that they're talking about restricting in the state of Wyoming. But the agency didn't feel like the commission had the authority to do that, so they're seeking the ability to do that. So that debate's going on in Wyoming. Meanwhile, in Montana clarified that drones and things are not illegal, but they actually took a step back away from their complete trail camera ban. They allow trail cameras now in the state of Montana. They're only restricting wireless trail cameras. Arizona's got some restrictions on wireless trail cameras. Nevada's got restrictions on wireless trail cameras. So there's folks mostly in the West that they have some concerns about technology and fair chase issues. And being in a company like mine, where we're making some of that technology, but also the fact that I'm a professional member of Boone and Crockett, I feel like I'm kind of pinched in between those two sides of the continuum, and so I'd rather have other people, espouse their ideas, so that I can just file that away and use them when I go lobby for different policy positions.
Well, I think we're all uncomfortable with it. I mean, I think to me the great definition of fair chase is: are we giving an animal an equal chance of getting away as we have of reducing it to possession? obviously it's situational. The interesting thing about technology is it can either make you a better, more humane hunter, or it can encourage you to be a less humane, take a chance hunter. So looking at the SIG system, for instance, this is one of the big debates we had with the optics test team. It could encourage you to take a shot too far, to allow your proficiency, whether demonstrated or assumed, to take an animal at a much farther range than you've practiced, just because it's a pretty effective system of showing you the proper hold off and hold over at distant shots. But the other part of that is it can also make you a more competent, humane hunter by ensuring that you place a bullet in the right place every time. It's really up to you to determine where that is. So I frankly applaud the Boone and Crockett Club for being the little bit of the gatekeeper for the morality of it, because I think it's a hard thing for legislators and fish and game commissioners to do, just because the evolution of technology is so rapid. It's hard to say. It's really how it's deployed in the field, I think, that matters. And the best example I have of that is in Montana with the Luminoc. For years, the Luminoc illuminated knock system on bows was prohibited because the Fish and Game Commission felt like it encouraged shooting after legal hours. So it was years before I ever shot one. When I finally did, I recognized I think it's an ethical thing to use, because you can easily recover your arrow. You can quickly determine if you made a hit or not. There were a number of other people who had a similar experience with them, and after years of prohibition, the state finally allowed the use of Luminox, illuminated nocks, here in Montana. So I think that's a pretty good example that it's not one thing all the time. I think there's an evolution of this technology. I do think, we haven't really covered long distance hunting in the context of the podcast in the past, but one of the things that worries me is just because you're able to do it doesn't mean you should, because of a lot of situational things. For instance, the time of flight of the bullet is often one or two steps of an animal, so the shot that you were sure about taking when you pulled the trigger isn't the same when that bullet arrives.
Yeah.
That's situational, but to outlaw that technology that enables it, I think is a little misguided.
We got criticized a little bit when we came out with the Edge TLR bullet, and that bullet, TLR, stands for Terminal Long Range. And it was a bullet that we engineered so it had a higher ballistic coefficient, so it was more accurate, less wind drift, less drop at farther distances. But the most important thing we did with that bullet is we designed it in a way so that it would open up even at lower velocities. Because when bullets start getting beyond 500 and some yards, they start to lose velocity, and that reduces how much they expand. And the amount that a bullet expands is pretty important to how much trauma it causes in order to put the animal down. And I had some folks in the hunter ed community criticizing that bullet, saying that we were encouraging people to shoot long distances. And I think the important thing the way that we talked about it is we're not encouraging people to shoot long distances. We know that there are people that like to make long distance shots. That's part of the challenge for them for hunting. And so if they're going to do that, we want to make sure that they're using a bullet that will do an ethical job when it gets there. And that was what our intent was with that specific bullet. And I think it's a fine line when you get into this, where when you try to create a product to meet the needs of that particular user, are you encouraging other people to become that kind of user? Are you encouraging people to become the long range shooter and things? And I think the same thing comes up with these optic systems. And I've seen people complaining about gun companies that advertise 1,000-yard range out of the box. They think that that's immoral in some way, and I think that's crazy. What that means is people are building really good guns, which people have wanted since the beginning of time. How the hunter uses it ends up becoming the big thing. So, and I'd be curious about Eric's thoughts here, because he's a technology company. That's what he does. So I'm curious what his thoughts are, and if sometimes this move away from technology, whether it's in optics and other things, is detrimental to R3 efforts.
Yeah, obviously, as a tech company in the outdoor industry, we sit in a funny position because we build an app. Powderhook is an app, and so much of what we advocate for is to put your phone down and go and live and experience your life outside of the phone. And so we're in this weird position in that we basically advocate for using the phone to be your gateway to not using your phone. I guess as it relates to technology in all facets of hunting, one of the things that I guess I believe is that it's important to have these conversations. Sometimes the questions are the important part, because between two hunters, we're not going to come up with an answer that pacifies everyone. And I think it's important that smart people who care about this stuff are able to have conversations, because as Andrew mentioned, so much of this stuff is really a scale. It's a matter of, a fair chase is hardly a binary thing to most people, right? So is a trail camera that sends me photos, is that fair chase? Well, Boone and Crockett has to make their position somewhat binary. Is it or isn't it? But the rest of us live on this spectrum where we maybe I don't think that is, or maybe I do think it is. And what I guess I would love to see as it relates to any technology, whether that's a crossbow that shoots 400 feet per second shot during the rifle season, is if you don't like that, have discourse about that in a way that is encouraging to others and not off-putting and barrier building to the people that are interested in learning to be a part of this community. And so all of that is to say, much like all of the discourse politically or any discourse that we see on social media, these things aren't black and white. These things have a lot of gray. And so I would just encourage people listening to this podcast, as you engage in these debates, remember that having the debate is part of it. And having a good conversation about what's right and wrong is really an important part of it. But neither you nor the person you're arguing with are going to change legislation or are going to drastically change the way lots and lots of people feel about something. So as you're making your point, be kind to one another and talk about it in a way that isn't off-putting to somebody who may be reading the comment section of your back and forth and evaluating whether or not they want to make a step into the outdoors. So I guess where we stand as a brand at Powderhook is it's not our job to decide the law. I certainly have my opinions, but if it's a legal method of take in your state, then we want to encourage you to do it. Now, that's kind of a pansy-ass way of describing a policy position, but our feeling is that there are lots of qualified people who do this for a living, who are doing their best to protect the resource and to protect the good name of hunting. And our job is to just encourage people to go be part of whatever part of that spectrum they feel comfortable being part of. So if game cameras that send you photos are legal in your state and that's your jam, I think that's great. And when they become illegal, or if the new range finding rifle scope becomes illegal in your state, then we don't think you should do that. Just don't. And that's where we stand on it. And I realize that's kind of sitting right on the middle of the fence, but I think there's really qualified people who care about this resource throughout the country. And in most states, you're talking about people that really want to get this right. I think certainly weigh in, have your opinion, but let them get it right, and then let's be encouraging and kind to one another as we talk about it.
I don't know. I mean, that's just so limp-wristed. So, I agree with you in some ways, but at some point, somebody does have to make that decision. And so just saying, oh, do whatever you want to do sounds awesome on paper, but are you just then surrendering all of your perspective to somebody who you say has the responsibility to get it right, who may not be any more qualified than you? And in a lot of cases, that is the case with fish and game commissioners or legislators.
I think that's a fair criticism, honestly. And the challenge for us is, as a business, is how does my lens affect what does my view or our brand, if I'm speaking on behalf of our brand, what is that going to do to change the way policymakers see things in a certain state? Now, Ryan's in a different position because his job is to go and affect policy positions, but our job is to encourage people to get out and experience this stuff. And so in many ways, Andrew, your criticism is fair because I've pumped the brakes on us being part of these conversations in many ways, because all I see is a path to pissing people off and making others unwelcome. Now, on an interpersonal level, do I have opinions? Absolutely. And would I be happy to wade into that on a personal level as not a representative of this brand? Yeah. I struggle to figure out how to, there's very seldom such clear, obvious things that it's like our brand should stand behind that. So I'll use CWD as a good example. Andrew, you wrote a great piece in Outdoor Life this time. I think our policy position as a brand as it relates to CWD is we're talking to consumers. Consumers should do the things you outlined in your article. Now, do I think deer farms should be a thing? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no, but I'm not a scientist on the level that would be qualified to do anything other than puppet what somebody else says. So I just choose not to get into the don't go to the deer farm conversation because I just don't feel like we're qualified to do anything but evangelize the things that our users, that the end user can do to help with something like that. Does that make sense?
Eric, you ignorant slut. No.
So I don't think it does make sense because, all right, if you look at the just participate and engage, are you going to encourage somebody to go to a deer farm? That's participating and engaging.
Yeah, we don't encourage them, but we also don't discourage it. We just don't touch it. Okay, so here's the problem. Here's the problem I have with deer farm. Is I am a member of a club in western Nebraska, a really cool place called Dismal River Club, where they bring elk from out of state to an enclosed place where people hunt elk. Is that a deer farm? I don't know. Would I want to do that? No. Do a lot of people from all over the world come to do that? Yeah. So what's a pro hunting brand to do in that environment? Do we say, well, that's not a good idea because you could be moving CWD from elk populations in other states to cervids in this state? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know enough to be that expert on behalf of our brand in cases like that.
Okay, so those are big picture controversial issues, but what about when there's policies that discourage recruitment and retention of new people? So, and there's probably lots of examples, but one of the things that I'm hearing out of Wyoming, they've done a survey of their hunters in the state to see how they feel about some of the policies, and they haven't published it from what I can tell, so I haven't read it myself. So I've only gotten everything secondhand from people that were involved in the report. But one of the things they found was that hunters under the age of 35 had a very different understanding of what technology was appropriate for hunting and what violated fair chase. Older hunters didn't like these newfangled gadgets. Younger hunters did. So if we start creating regulations where these gadgets are not allowed in hunting, are we discouraging that younger age class from participating in the sport? So that's kind of a generalized thing. But what if there's regulations that said you can't bring your cell phone out in the woods with you hunting? It's extreme, but I'm just picking it.
The cell phone is the preeminent violation of pure fair chase, right? I mean, how many people text their buddies from the stand saying they saw X deer or we're catching, walleyes in this area? I mean, that's almost ubiquitous, isn't it?
It is. So that phone can be used to communicate and give the animals you're pursuing a disadvantage that most people would think is a violation of fair chase. That using radios and phones to organize a hunt in that way is probably going too far, and it's blatantly illegal in a lot of states. However, we also expect every hunter to know whether they're on the right side of the property boundary or not, and the way that people do that today is with their cell phone. They open up, Andrew and I were in the middle of the Fort Pierre grasslands one time and opened up Powderhook and saw that the fence that we thought we could cross, we just realized was private land, and we didn't cross it. And I probably would have got a prairie chicken had we crossed it. I'm sure that's where they all were, but we didn't cross it. So that cell phone in the Powderhook app was helping us be ethical in that sense, but if you use that same cell phone to orchestrate a deer drive, then most people would say it's a violation. So it's the act and the individual choices that people make in the field that are important. So it's not just that I'm a company that makes gadgets that some people are trying to restrict, because I am. I've got wireless trail cameras. I've got optics that are, in the Bushnell line that are probably going to cross the line for some people, and I want to sell those things. So I'm upfront about that. But I'm also in the game of creating products to try to get more people into the field, and sometimes those products are the same thing. And so those are complicated issues, but I think it's important that hunters not shy away from taking a stand and not think that some wildlife commission that meets off in Lincoln 4 times a year knows better about those issues than you do. I think it's important that people do take positions and voice their concerns. If overwhelmingly the hunting public says we don't want wireless trail cameras, well, then my incentive to build and sell them goes away. But the thing is, the hunting public does like them. I love my wireless camera for preseason scouting. It makes my fall much better and my summer much better, getting those images and knowing what's going on in the woods when I'm stuck in the office and can't be there. But it concerns me when wildlife agencies start making restrictions that could take those tools away from people and take away some of the things that make people enjoy the outdoors. So get off the middle and take a stand, Dinger.
Well, I was maybe a little too hard on Eric, but I think one of the things and the tensions that I feel too, I mean, I try to be an objective reporter in my professional life as much as I can, but I also feel that one of the obligations that we have the longer we do this is to become advocates and to have opinions. And to me, I see an interesting tension, not just with Bronson's talk about sort of gateway technology. I see it also as almost an obligation. When you are just starting hunting, your pores are open to sensory experiences, but also perceptions and perspectives. The older you get, the more that sort of you get closed in and you start to form opinions, and then those opinions are followed by maybe more deeply held opinions. I think that's appropriate. I think that's a proper evolution, but those typically are the people who have the strongly held opinions, who vocalize them articulately and loudly, are the ones who tend to make the policymakers pay attention to. I think there's an awful lot of other people who have opinions who don't voice them, and I think they're losing an opportunity.
Agreed.
What you laid out perfectly is what I believe is the real challenge of what I consider systems thinking, right? Where the wireless trail camera lives in a system that needs more hunters. It lives in a system that needs to protect a resource. It lives in a system that has constituencies of hunter, of biologist, of fish and wildlife employee, of legislator, of governor. And one of the things that's really intimidating about wading into those systems when you're not an expert is I'm getting there, and please don't take this as a lifelong cop-out, because it's not. But one of the things that I really value is people that live in a system like that for a long time, like the two of you have. You've been in conservation and writing about it and advocating for policy positions for a long time, have a much more holistic grasp on that system than a person in my position who, frankly, guys, like most of the conservation topics we talk about, our listener probably has noticed that you guys do most of the talking because you're by far the experts. Now, if we want to talk about nerd stuff and businessy things and apps and tech and things like that. Those are places where I've spent my whole career and would be very comfortable. And so I promise you I am not without opinions. In fact, I think I probably have more than I'm justified to have. But one of the things that scares me is wading into a system that I don't fully understand. And I can give you lots of examples like that, but I'll give you one very simple one that was just earth-shattering to me. One of the things that I believe a physician friend of mine told me this one time was the more he's a very, very highly trained 16 years of medical school specialist in medicine. He said, the more I learn about the human body, the less I realize I know. I had what I thought was a very pointed question for a wildlife biologist. And my question was this. You guys are going to laugh at me, but this is why it's hard when you're new to create real stakes in the ground. I asked this question. Why is it bad if HSUS wants to buy properties and conserve them or preserve them in perpetuity and just leave it alone? What's wrong with that? Why wouldn't that be a net good thing for conservation if HSUS is buying property and leaving it be? I don't understand why that's not a good thing. And this is how like rudimentary I was thinking about this stuff. He's like, well, who would manage it? How is it going to be good for wildlife over time if we don't let it burn every now and then, or if we don't trim it every now and then, or cut it every now and then? And it was like this whole, oh my God, I have so much to learn moment that scares me out of taking hardline policy positions on a lot of things, because there's just people like you know so much more about this kind of thing.
All right, so maybe we need to talk about something that I think all three of us are on equal footing. Triscuits or wheat thins?
You know, this is why we have a Food and Drug Administration, is to make decisions for us. And I feel comfortable letting them determine which my preference.
First of all, we need to out you.
Yeah, we do.
Andrew proposed this question leading into our podcast today. And Bronson, what did you have to say?
What is a Triscuit?
Oh, God.
That's almost like saying, what's a mother? Well, I'm a Triscuit man. I'm going to tell you, and I surprised myself by saying that, because I thought for sure all the way up until I opened my mouth to speak that I was going to say I was a wheat thin man. But there's just something it's wholesome. Triscuits are wholesome. It's that woven wheat cracker, and you don't feel real bad about eating a lot of them, which I do every time I open a box. They go with everything. And wheat thins they're good. They're tasty. They're a little sweet. And after a while, they all kind of taste the same. Never had that situation with the Triscuit. Each one's like the very first one.
You're wrong about that. It's on texture base only. It's absolutely a wheat thin, because biting into a Triscuit is like taking an old corn stalk and biting it, and all that dry chaff explodes in your mouth, and you're left with not a cracker, but more chaff shavings in your mouth. They're good, but they're not on a wheat thin level. And Bronson, we know your answer. How can you not have had a Triscuit in your life?
Look, I've never eaten a Triscuit in my life. Did Sandy Duncan used to do a commercial for them? Do you guys remember?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I had a really bad Sandy Duncan experience as a child, and maybe that's why that I've stayed away from them my whole life. I mean, when I found out that she played Peter Pan and Peter Pan was not a boy, it just blew my mind. And so I haven't been able to eat wheat thins or Triscuits ever since. But no, the truth of the matter is, my family grew up eating nothing but Oreo cookies, so that's why I'm as chubby as I am. And so wheat thins are one of those things that you buy that first week of January and pretend you're on a diet, and dip them in butter and things, and then you're good to go.
What? You dip a wheat thin in butter?
Look at me. I dip everything in butter.
All I can say, the great fallacy of Dittner's argument is to imagine that you would just eat a Triscuit alone. A Triscuit is nothing but a topping vehicle.
Mm-hmm. carrier for Goose Prosciutto.
Yeah,
Allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
not like you'd know. Living in a nanny state.
Just sitting on the fence in a nanny state.
So now I think we understand why Nebraska's unicameral, because they just we're not going to argue about things. Just let those guys make the decision, and basically they're parliament. You know what? We had a little thing called the Revolutionary War. Screw parliament. We got a bicameral system in this country. Get with the times, Nebraska.
Well, I think that's the last word of the entire podcast.
Get with the times, Nebraska.
Get with the times, Nebraska. I think the other quotable thing is, this was off air. Bronson, do you remember what you said? I've known a lot of people that deserve killing.
Oh yeah, I've known a lot of people in this world that need killing, but I haven't met a lot of people that need dying.
And with that, dear listener,
Robert Redford said that, right?
No, that's a Bronson original.
Oh my.
Henry David Thoreau. It's in Walden. Look it up.
we'll hope to see some of you at the SHOT Show. Others will see you right here on Gravel next week.